Thanks so much for coming. Late nights after lunch. I'm sure everybody would rather have a nap right now. This is going to be fun. There's a lot of data. So I want to start just iHeart data. I mean, I do. I'm sure a lot of you guys, when you think of this, you like data. But really, what does that mean to us as marketers? And like Udi alluded to, a lot of times we think of it from the marketer's perspective and not necessarily from consumers who are a lot savvier these days. So, these buzzwords, I just like them because we're going to look at a lot of charts later, so I want us to have a little fun. We have good data, bad data. I mean, what does this mean to you? What does this mean to your business? This is a threefer. Data mining, data dumps, my least favorite of all, big data. It gets so silly that you get to Goonies data and, wait for it, crazy guy over there, Star Trek data. So I get a little sick of buzzy data stuff. So one of the things that I always saw in these studies, whether I was doing our own original research on abandoned cart marketing, or if I was looking at any industry studies out there, is that it was very often from the marketer's perspective. So reading the tea leaves of what consumers were doing, trying to understand what are these trends with consumers and anticipating why people are abandoning, monitoring your abandonment rate, looking at it from what your competitors' abandonment rates are doing. So it's always a little bit of this internal self-analysis. And I thought, that's not really fair. I mean, my mother, granted, she's had to listen to email marketing for the past 15 or so years, calls me up whenever she gets a really good or really bad abandoned cart reminder email. That's always a fun conversation. But how can we really make this cart data better? What's going to make it more interesting and actionable? And how do we give our consumers a little bit of credit as far as their awareness around shopping carts, and then use that to make their experience better and to make our messages better and also drive more revenue. So, I had this up just to reinforce that perspective that a lot of us marketers have. I really think we look in the rear view of the cart. We have our abandonment rate, we're triggering these messages out, but when we're looking at how to decrease abandonment, how to optimize the checkout process and those product pages, and really keep that stream going, a lot of times we're just using hindsight, and we're not asking those consumers, what's going to make this better, and what are you doing when you are using the cart? So to divide this up, I want to look at how we market for abandoned cart marketing and then how consumers are shopping. So I think a lot of us have this philosophy that people go on our site, they love it, they're excited to shop, they're having fun, they're kicking their heels up, it's a great thing for everybody. And then, really this is what we're going to look at the data later. So here's the fun part, enjoy it before I get to a whole bunch of charts. But really our consumers have gotten a lot more savvy when it comes to owning the shopping cart. And the difference here, I want to get rid of this abandonment terminology completely. I'll still use it because it's ingrained in my head, but really it's become shopping cart utilization. So when we get into this data and we really start to look at what consumers like and what they don't like and what annoys the hell out of them, really look at this through the lens of how the cart's being utilized to shop and check out and purchase, and then revisit your site later through different devices or different channels, but to come back to buy. So like Udi mentioned, we partnered with Magento for this study. It was 1,000 online consumers, so only folks who had bought online. One report is already out, the one that you're seeing here. The dimension that I'm going to talk about in the first part of this presentation is in this report, so it's looking at shopping frequency. We also have gender, which there's pretty much an even split between male and female. And the data that we're going to see today hasn't been published, so it's a debut for Magento. It's a lot of fun. I'll try to not be any stereotypical stuff with male versus females. Please don't get angry. But what I wanted to do with this when I started to write out the actual survey was, what do folks love and hate about cart? I just went in with the assumption that there was an awareness about the cart being used by marketers to market to them as they're checking out, rather than this behind the curtain Wizard of Oz moment where we think we're controlling some little gap between checking out and buying. Which has been the case for many years, but consumers have definitely caught up with this. Okay, so here comes the data. This first dimension that I'll look at is shopping frequency. So the terminology I'm going to use here, the way that we divided these up, again, all of these are online consumers. So frequent shoppers purchase weekly online, daily, at least once a week. Occasional shoppers purchase at least once a month online, and then infrequent shoppers have purchased in the past 12 months. So what you'll see here, just for this split, it's probably what you would expect. One in four of your these consumers were buying at least once a week, which I would consider a very active buyer, but on the back end of that 34%, when we look at infrequent shoppers, go ahead in your head right now, form some ideas of how you think, especially infrequent shoppers, would have a different perception of shopping cart marketing, and we'll see if those actually come to light. So these charts, I'm going to build them out because they're really data dense. I'm going to try to throw a bunch of arrows up for you, but the deck will be available after the show, and a lot easier in the report. So if you aren't seeing what you're looking for, find me later and I'll show you how to get to the actual numbers. So one of the first things I want to understand was device possession. Yes, you're shopping frequently, you're shopping infrequently, but what devices are you holding? And as we get deeper into this data, we're going to look at how device possession really transitions that cart from the sofa to the desk or the office. But what you'll see here when it comes to desktop computers and laptops, those traditional PC experiences, it's over 60%. There's not too much of a fluctuation between infrequent shoppers all the way up to frequent shoppers. But I mean, there's some. It's still very high. But what's interesting is when you look at tablets and smartphones, there's a pretty big gap between those frequent shoppers, again, those who are buying at least once a week, and then the rest of the group. And then with your infrequent shoppers, smartphone possession was lower, but tablet and smartphone possession was a little bit higher. So these folks, a good percentage of all the groups have these devices, and they're really, as we'll see in this data, utilizing it during the carting process and that cart utilization, not cart abandonment experience. All right, so these are going to be heavy. So this is the first one you're seeing like this. There are going to be a lot more. So I want to give you some orientation on it. What we're seeing for this slide specifically is viewing a cart on a different device. So did you cart items and then go to your tablet from your laptop or vice versa? Are you actually taking that experience from one device to another? So we have this frequent, occasional, and infrequent shoppers. And the other dimension that you're going to see here is always exhibiting that behavior, occasionally exhibiting that behavior, or never exhibiting the behavior. So I want to build these out just so you can follow along and not have to do too much of like one of those logic puzzles of the train leaving at whatever time. But what's interesting here, if we look at these most frequent shoppers, 62% of them are always or occasionally switching devices from their cart. So this again speaks to that utilization of the cart as opposed to that abandonment of the cart. There's almost an instinctive knowing that if they go from their tablet and cart something and then they go to their laptop, they're going to be able to continue that shopping experience and really extend it from that first session. So when we think of how we're messaging folks during that abandonment period, it may be less about that abandon and more how you can facilitate that experience of someone shopping. And then also notice here, I'm going to show on the next slide, but with the frequent shoppers in this upper section, 20% are always exhibiting this behavior. So when you look at your customers who are the most loyal customers and those who are buying most frequently, 1 in 5 of them are always switching between devices as they cart. And that's a good amount of revenue that they probably represent. So in this slide, this is cart to an actual store. So we all talk about showrooming and all those fun things, but really how is the cart connecting that online experience either in your store to one of your competitors' brick and mortar stores or vice versa? So as we build this out, what's interesting to me, you see 58% of frequent shoppers are always or occasionally exhibiting this behavior. So it's slightly lower than what we saw for device switching. Which it's not significantly different, not in the statistical sense, but there's not a major difference between the two. But what I did find interesting is that for frequent shoppers, it was slightly higher for them switching in a store, where I would have thought online customers who were buying that frequently, it maybe would have been a little bit higher as far as switching devices rather than switching channels. But this speaks to how your consumers are doing research on those products, how they are making comparisons. Think about your product, whether it's something that needs to be experienced in person, or their fabrics people want to see, or their colors they want to look at. Do they want to flip the electronic device backwards and see all the different connections? So this can really help you when you're thinking about, all right, do I need to panic and send that abandoned cart message when it's abandoned, or is there a way for me to really facilitate this experience as my most frequent shoppers are transitioning between one channel to another? Okay, so this was one of my favorite ones. It's a little less, data heavy, a little bit more on the emotional side. So I find notifications about abandoned cart reminders to be. And the dimensions here are intrusive, annoying, and helpful. So the reason I picked these, intrusive and annoying, you may think, oh, they cannibalize each other, they both have some negative context, but intrusive to me really speaks to how data is being used by the retailer or by the brand to message to their consumers. And there's always been this whole, I've experienced a lot. I mean, there are only stats out there like 13 to 15% of retailers are sending abandoned cart messages, but there's just this feeling, which I think is a little bit outdated, that consumers have a negative reaction to it, that they feel that the data is being used in a way that they didn't expect or anticipate. So I wanted to include intrusive in there, and then annoying, because this is not a message that your consumers expect. It's not like your weekly promotional email or your daily deal. It's not an order confirmation or shipping confirmation. It has this, it's connected to how they're engaging with your brand, but it's not something they're expecting. So I did divide those in this study. So to highlight, to give you some orientation here, the good news is when it comes to being helpful, it's pretty high. I mean, when we look at infrequent shoppers, so those who are not buying online very often, still 35% of them thought these messages were helpful. And to me, that was higher than I expected it to be, especially as we look at these infrequent shoppers in a little bit more detail. I saw this as a bit more optimistic than I anticipated. So if we shift over to intrusive and annoying, the other dimension on this chart is neither agree or disagree, but it was a little too compacted if I included that. So that's why these percentages aren't totaling up to 100. But for intrusive and annoying, these aren't too bad either. There's not that much of a freak out factor when it comes to how the data is being used or this message being introduced into your cadence. So looking at what action, I mean, this is what we want. We want our consumers to take an action when they receive this message. It's not just a friendly touch point. It's not just a brand engagement. It's not an opportunity for you to just check in or get your consumers to engage with your social networks. You want to get them back into the cart to buy. So for this one, if you look on the bottom, from dark to light, it's complete an order. That's what we want to do. Shop but not buy, which I thought was really interesting. And when we look at the numbers in a minute, I'll explain why. But I mean, for me, this is the opportunity for you. These are the folks who I'm expecting it. It's interesting. It's interesting enough for me to go to your site, but I'm not buying. So this is the real big opportunity for you to figure out ways to make this message more engaging and to really get them in that buying mood again. And then do nothing. That's where you have to even work harder. So this first one, this is for complete your order. 38% of your frequent shoppers will complete their order when they receive the abandoned cart message. That's a good percentage. If you're not sending an abandoned cart message right now, finger shake, do it. Your most loyal customers want it. But even infrequent shoppers, I mean, close to 1 in 5, I was happy with that. I thought they were going to be a little bit grumpier about these, but still pretty good. If we move this over to shop, not buy, combine these together, there's an action being taken. It's great. Good, like that. But this is the percentage where your messages can work harder. This is where they need to hear a little bit more. Whether you're selling too much and they're just thinking of that convenience factor of I'm still in the shopping experience, not the checkout experience, this is the group where your messages can really be optimized. And we have a lot of content about how to optimize these messages, but again, this speaks more just to that consumer data. And then we have the do-nothings. We don't like them. So one of the biggest questions I get is, when do I send the trigger message? Now, I've done an audit of a few hundred retailers and actually looked at when they send their message. So the real world experience of this that's out there, I've asked marketers, when do you send yours? I've matched those up. I found disconnects. I mean, typically retailers send them. Quickest one I saw was 45 minutes after abandonment. The longest one was 3 days, but the average was around 24 hours. And most marketers feel like it is within 24 hours, but there's still some fluctuation in that zone. So with this one, I was curious, what do consumers want? Everything from the marketer's perspective and what I've done in my audits points toward that less than 24-hour period. Will that match up with consumers? The answer was no. But if you've read Malcolm Gladwell's books, you've heard the whole jar of jelly thing, where a lot of times if people are self-selecting what they want, it's not necessarily what they actually want in the real world. So what I found here, again, this is frequent, occasional, and infrequent. The larger groups are in this within a day or more than a day. So there's still this expectation of 24 hours, which is good, and it's probably in line with whatever you're sending out or whatever you had planned to send out. But you still had this group over here that were expecting it immediately and within an hour. And these spiked up a bit for frequent shoppers. Again, those most loyal, who are buying daily or weekly. So, what do you do here? You've got one thing that's telling you, this is what you see in the real world if you audit several hundred retailers. You've got marketers who are doing the spread between 45 minutes and 3 days, and then you've got this whole mix of what consumers are saying. You have to really put it all together. And if you're looking for an idea of timing, I've really found if you're sending an abandoned cart series and you've got that storyboard built out of the first message maybe being more of a customer service reminder and then getting progressively more aggressive as far as an incentive or reinforcing urgency, if you have that mapped out, starting earlier typically will get people back to the site quicker. We'll also compare this to gender to see what males versus females think about this. So this is from the report. This is the pretty version. I'm showing this because our designer spent a lot of time. Don't take a picture of this one. I want to show you ugly data. So, that's the thing. This is in the report. I think it looks pretty, but it's pretty hard to read. So, yeah, here comes some ugly data. This is what I'm sure most of us look at. We're familiar with spreadsheets. I love conditional formatting because it takes a lot of the work out. So, what you're seeing in this mess is what content in the message is going to get people to more likely to buy or less likely to buy. So I went through all the abandoned cart reminders that I receive. I listened to all the conversations my mother's had about these for the past 15 years and just made this list. So this is a pretty comprehensive list from what are major causes of abandonment, like sticker shock, shipping costs, will photos of the products help? So when I made a dimension here of more likely, neutral, or less likely, a fun little pattern emerged where frequent shoppers, anything that you put in was higher, which is they want to see all of it. I'm going to break this out earlier, so don't do the math. I'll highlight what's most important. Occasional shoppers was in the middle, pretty cool, and then infrequent shoppers didn't like any of it. So this is where you start to see them get a little grumpy, maybe a little that intrusive and annoying is coming into play, and there might be different ways to speak to them. So if we step through here, again, the ugly data, you saw the pretty ones earlier. So for frequent shoppers, what's the most likely of the content? And what was interesting to me here is its order total and photos of the products that were in the cart. And then shipping and arrival dates. So this is shipping duration, not shipping costs. So when you think of, are my shipping costs freaking people out? Do I need to do free shipping? A lot of times it's just how long it's going to take for the product to get there. And these are the people, again, they're buying daily or weekly. So they expect to get this stuff very quickly. And if we shift over to occasional shoppers, the two that were highest were different. So you saw photos of products that were left in the cart. So visually representing that product. I also feel like that can evoke the shopping cart a little bit. So for these people who are shopping, checking out, and then you visually cue them back to the cart where they had that high purchase intent, that can be very effective. But in the other one here, if you can't read it, it's call-outs to savings and coupon amounts. So these occasional shoppers buying once a month are a little bit more focused on any discounts that they've received. So if you are giving 10% off, find a way to include that in the message to really call that out. I have a lot of examples where you have the order and the shipping and all the dollar amounts, but the 10% off code is in red. So you're really reinforcing that in the abandoned cart reminders. So here are the grumpy butts, the people who don't like anything. So what do they like the most out of the things that they thought were not very likely to get them back to the site? So this one was eye-opening to me. It's alternative ways to buy. So you think of photos of the product, discounts, product descriptions, all that stuff, visual elements of whether it's just completely customer service themed or it looks like your actual cart page. Take all that out. It's alternate ways to buy. So this means phone numbers. This means a way to buy in store. A huge opportunity to promote features like live chat, customer service, all those themes that maybe don't deal directly with the purchase, but there could be a lot of questions about the ordering process. If you've historically had a lot of catalog sales or you have an older demographic, this could be some kind of security concerns. So if you are seeing a high abandonment rate from these infrequent shoppers, this might be a way to really change up the content when you target them specifically. So what did they like the least? And again, this was eye-opening. It was call-outs to savings and coupon amounts. So these people could be saving 25% or getting free shipping, but that was going to make them least likely to go to the site. Now, I found that fascinating. These people could be saving a ton of money. It's a huge value proposition to go back to the site and buy, but they don't want to have it. So when you're looking at the spectrum of who are these people abandoning the cart, how are they utilizing the cart for the shopping experience, really think about those who don't purchase frequently and whether you're segmenting out those different groups, those different populations to send a specific message, or if you're just sending one and trying to have a one-size-fits-all approach. Really make sure you're including a lot of these elements and positioning it to the consumer based off of how frequently they purchase from you. All right, so now we're going to go over to gender. So I tried as much as I could to overlay a lot of the stuff that you saw in the first part of this as far as shopping frequency is concerned. Some of it I dug a little deeper, some of it I got rid of, but I tried to really highlight a lot of the differences and get rid of some of the overlap. So we're going to start out with device possession. This one's a little bit easier. It's male and female. Didn't do pink or blue, just to be fair. Kept with the template. So what's interesting here is before, when we saw shopper frequency and we looked at device possession, we saw it was over 60% for those traditional PCs, whether it's desktop or a laptop. And the same holds true here. And there's not that much of a difference between male or female. So there's a little bit here with females as far as desktop computers are concerned, but really, that's not, a lot of us are focused on responsive design, getting a little bit away from that desktop experience. But when we come over to tablet computers and smartphones, again, not that much of a difference. And I was kidding around with somebody here earlier. They're like, oh, what was the difference between male and females? And I'll be honest with you, a lot of the data that I went into, it wasn't that different. So I've highlighted a few differences here, but if you really feel like, let's start with a demographic field, let's look at gender, how are males shopping differently than females and abandoning differently? For a lot of the scenarios, there wasn't that much of a difference. So if you're looking to invest a way to segment further or customize these messages or develop triggers based off of any type of dynamic, shopper frequency really gave more ways to hone in. So as we go through this data, look at it, and you'll gain some insights, but there was also a thematic result of things not being too different. Okay, so shopping cart usage. This one, in the previous section, we looked at storing items on a different device and going in store. So the other elements, which are broken out for shopper frequency as well, I didn't include, but this one I dug a little deeper, and the reason I did is when we look at the always behavior for this, what was interesting is there's summarize my purchase so I can decide which items to buy. This is narrowing a little bit toward the checkout concept, a little bit away from that utilization or extended shopping experience that I was talking about earlier. But for both males and females who are always exhibiting this behavior, it ended up being the highest. So that was a little interesting to me. But as I build this out, what was different, those are the ones that are highest, show you where they are. But what's interesting to me is if you combine the always and the occasional behavior. So these are folks who are doing it frequently, not necessarily doing it all the time, but at least are familiar with this behavior and exhibiting it. There was a difference between male and females. So the difference here is males were saving items to buy later. So how does this factor in? If you are looking to segment differently, or if you have products that are maybe limited inventory, males exhibited more of this behavior of storing these items. Maybe it's a little indecision to purchase. Maybe it's just part of, I have a longer concept of the shopping experience. Whereas with females, getting over to 82% of here, they end up staying true with summarizing my purchase before I decide which items to buy. So this goes back to, if you think about it, and this is one of the ways I shop, clearly not female, but I like to add way more to my cart than I have any intent of buying. I also love cart options where I can modify size and color, quantity, a lot of those features in my cart. And that speaks to the cart being part of the shopping experience and a little bit less of the checkout experience. So if you do have a split between products between male and females, this could be one concept to look at for optimizing your cart page itself, but then tying that into your abandoned cart messages as far as speaking to summarizing purchases, more that consideration versus saving for later, where you have a little bit more of a duration of time. So just to give you a comparison here of store and device, because we looked at this one earlier with shopper frequency, it really, I mean, it skewed down for gender in a different way. I mean, we saw the always behavior for those frequent shoppers being very high. It was 20 and 22% for those who always purchase. I mean, those who most frequently purchase. We saw behavior like 20, 22% for these, and they were just both a lot lower when we divide this up by gender dimension. So again, this speaks to if you're looking for a way to add an additional layer of segmentation to your abandoned cart messages, really look at that shopper frequency, and you can anticipate those behaviors of device hopping or channel hopping in a little bit more detail. So this one's different. This is in the report, divided up for shopper frequency as well. But I wanted to ask about wish lists. And I've learned from working with a number of clients and from managing a few programs, wish lists, they're not very popular. I feel like they get overlooked quite a bit. I feel like they were tried maybe 10 years ago or something. There was a big push because it was a new bell and whistle for people to play around with, but adoption rate wasn't very high. I think that the value proposition wasn't clearly communicated. The expectation of how to use it wasn't clear with consumers. But when you think about it from the marketer's perspective, and again, this is a bit of the rearview mirror that I showed earlier, you've got to think of this differently. You know, a lot of the data that we saw, consumers are using the cart in a way other than checking out. They're not, like if you carry this over in your head away from the online experience, you've got your shopping cart in the store, Target, and you're putting items on the conveyor belt. I mean, that's checking out. But really, this is more that selection process. So when you look at that data, you do, even with what I'm presenting here, you still have to make some assumptions about what folks are doing. But when it comes to a wish list, if you can communicate that value proposition and give folks a way to store these items, to have it more, to like really facilitate that extended shopping experience, it gives you another way to market to your consumers because you know what their intent is. Their intent isn't to purchase immediately. They're not abandoning the cart to leave the purchase because of sticker shock or shipping costs or anything like that. They're actually making a wish list. There's some aspirational element. And as a marketer, that gives you a way to communicate differently than somebody who is like a moth to the light, so close to purchase, and you're just trying to get them back on the site to buy. This way you can really facilitate an extended shopping experience in a different way. So the reason I included it here, I was surprised with this first set of data. This is for males, and you probably read this while I was yapping away, but would use the wish list instead of the shopping cart. So these are folks who see the value of having this wish list, which again should be positioned differently and have a value proposition of its own. But about 1 in 4 of these consumers, pretty evenly split between male and female, would replace what they're doing in the shopping cart with a wish list. And again, this arms you as a marketer to send a different communication channel to them and not have to make all those assumptions in the shopping cart. And then one difference that I saw here with females, use both. So, you know, even if you communicate that value proposition, there may still be an idea. This might be that maybe I'll get an incentive if I put items in my wish list and I put items in my cart. So I'll use both and see if I get a 10% off and a free shipping coupon. But females were a little bit more likely to use both. And then we've got the ones over there who would not use a wish list. So I feel like there's a good group of people that won't, but I do feel like it's something that's overlooked where there could be a lot of additional value. It could help you fine-tune a lot of your analysis of your cart data and why people are leaving your cart and giving them another way to store items to buy. So here we go with intrusive, annoying, and helpful again. So this one was interesting in a way. I'm going to build this out. So for helpful, like we saw earlier with shopping frequency, where it was a little over 50%, and then the infrequent shoppers were around 30-something%. These again were high. Males found them to be a little bit less helpful than females, but still the majority is high. I mean, the number is high on this. And yeah, I mean, again, with this, part of the fun of doing analysis, or not the fun, but one of the downsides is you can collect all this data, do a whole bunch of analysis, and things don't really shake out to be that interesting. So, you know, this data, again, I think gives you some motivation to maybe look at shopping frequency as that additional layer of making a more robust abandoned cart program. So likelihood to go back and complete the order, to do nothing, or to visit the site and do nothing. So for this one, it was interesting to me, you know, females were a little bit more likely to go back and purchase, but again, even with 29%, you know, close to 1 in 3 of your consumers are going to be likely, of your male consumers are going to be likely to go back and buy. So this just speaks to the effectiveness of sending the abandoned cart reminder. If you're not doing it, shaky finger again. If you are doing it, look at expanding it. And then if we go over to the do nothings, you see here that males were more likely to do nothing. So does this mean you shouldn't send to them if you have a very male-heavy demographic? Not necessarily. I think this could also speak to the message not being very effective. So we're going to look at some of the content differences that we saw earlier. This is a mix between the pretty chart and the ugly data that you saw earlier. So I tried to balance it out. So again, we have more likely to purchase, neither more likely or less likely. So as I build this out, pop a few things out. Callouts and savings were most important for both groups. So male and females wanted to see what they were saving. And this is for going back to the site, likely or middle of the road. And then photos of the products. With this one, it's less likely to actually get them to go back and buy. But middle of the ground, this one was actually pretty popular. So some of the ones that we saw carry over earlier, this again takes out some of the alternate channels to buy, which we saw for infrequent shoppers. But the split between male and females, they were pretty much in line with each other. And then timing the trigger. Oh, I'm going a little early. So timing the trigger, again, wanted to ask folks when they were expecting to receive this. And this data really mirrors a lot of what we saw with shopper frequency. So again, think about when you're timing your message and what I saw in that audit at the 45-minute to 3-day window. And again, these folks, there were a larger percentage of people that expected it to be within a day or more than 1 day. But with males, and this one was interesting to me because when we saw earlier how males were using their cart, they were using it to store items for later. So it was that duration, that extended process. But when they did want to receive this message, they were more interested in females in receiving it very quickly. So a bit of a dichotomy in what males were saying in this. They're like, yeah, I'm saving stuff for later, but then remind me about it very quickly. Yeah. And then I want to give you a wild card. So all this data is great, but one of the downfalls to an abandoned cart program is that you think of it as a static triggered message. You set it up, you test it, you build your content, you launch it, it's great, you're recovering a bunch of sales, set it up and run, forget about it. So you've got your consumer and she's not bouncing up and down her cart, but she's shopping. But this isn't your consumer the whole year round. You've got to think about the holidays. And I always use the crazy target people in this, I love it. But you really do have to think at any seasonality that you have with your products, whether it's the holiday season or if you have summer-related products, there's a very intense period of people on your site who may be one-time buyers who are only going to buy from you once a year or who are gifters. There's a whole other factor that you think about as far as being a cause for people using your cart in a different way. So in a separate study, this is one of the questions we asked marketers, is how do you change your abandoned cart marketing for the holidays? So 1 in 5 do nothing. Really hated to see that. But when people did, so if you're thinking to yourself, well, I don't do anything, I'm one of those 1 in 5, what can I do? I wanted to leave you with a little bit of inspiration on a way that you could change this. So it's including an offer when previously not used. So I've seen it be very effective to not include an incentive in your abandoned cart reminder emails. It can help you to maintain your average order value without sacrificing your margins, and it's not necessarily what consumers are looking to get from you. They are looking more for that reminder, facilitating the shopping experience, not necessarily fishing for 10% off. So, as you look at these gifters and these people who are doing a lot of comparison shopping and all these, shopping neuroses start to get amplified, look at including a different offer in your abandoned cart messages to make sure you are keeping that consumer interested and helping to encourage the purchase. And then increasing the value of the current offer. So you're really in line with the shopper intensity, the offer intensity also increases.